Okay. Actually live?
There's sound now. There's no image, but there's sound. Hey guys, we're gonna be starting real soon.
Yep. We're just
Really, really soon.
maybe wait for a couple people to come in.
Wait for that fan of mine to turn off. Just waiting for that. I think I switched it off 5 minutes ago, and it just takes a long time for it to register. I guess you and I should set up our recording.
Yeah, I'm just now hitting record. Let me check my options. No, don't do that.
I am also hitting record just now. So.
I'm unrecording
Oh no.
because it seems to have reset all of my.
Well, that's kind of annoying.
Yeah.
Well, while we figure this out, guys, I'm just gonna switch us over to not making noise. We'll be starting here real quick. Hey, everybody, we're here. Technical difficulties, the dragons of the conquered.
Briefly.
We did
Yes.
it.
Hello. Hello.
Before we get started here, I'm just going to preemptively apologize for my coughing. I am much better than I was earlier in this week, but I am still not all the way there. So I'm going to try to hit my handy dandy cough button as we go and hope that um, it doesn't get picked up by the mic. But when we were recording last night, we had a couple times where I wasn't quick enough. So if you're listening on the podcast, I'm probably gonna edit this part out too, but I probably edited all that out so you wouldn't even notice. But when we're live like this, um, I can't hide it. I can't stop it.
Yep.
All right, Matt, want to do the thing?
Let's get into it.
Let's do the thing.
You do the count.
There's one.
Yep.
Yeah, let's go in. You got the intro, you know that,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Okay. Let's go in. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hello and welcome to the Daily Planet Book Club, our monthly live stream discussion of a book chosen by you, our readers. I am the great angel Matt Freeman, and this is the evil goat man, Scott Daly.
I thought about doing a goat voice there, but I decided not to, and I'm kind of glad for it.
We don't need to do two voices in a row.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone joining us live tonight. Go ahead and say hello if you're hanging out in the chat. And hello to all of us hanging out via the podcast in the future. How's it going?
Yeah.
Future?
Hello, future. I hope everything's still well.
Yeah. What if it's like 1,000 years into the future and society has collapsed, but our recordings are how people know books.
Yeah.
And we're revered as some sort of godmen.
Well, then this will be an important podcast because we're
Oh, God.
talking about an important book, and
God, that's so much pressure.
it's a lot of responsibility. Honestly, I'm really glad that you framed this conversation as like a time capsule for eternity. Thanks.
No problem.
So,
no problem.
If you're joining us here for the first time, cool. Here's a quick primer on how this thing works. Each month, Scott and I select 5 books submitted by all of you guys. We put up a poll for all of our supporters on Patreon, and we let them vote on which they'd like us to talk about. The book with the most votes wins, and then we all read it together.
That's right. This month is actually a little bit different, though, because we didn't cull from people's suggestions to put up the books for nomination. We actually had one of our patrons, Dark Glass, who put up the money to get into that rare air, so he got to pick. He picked 6 from 6 different books for people to talk about this month, and this one won. He still asked for a vote, but this one won.
Yeah.
Anyway, we meet up on the last Friday of every month, and then we chat about that book. We pull slides of important or interesting moments, and then we deep dive into the book for a little bit. For those of you that are hanging out in chat, either in YouTube chat or in our Discord, feel free to make comments and ask questions as we go. We'll try to read those out and answer them as we go. We want this to be that interactive discussion. We want this to be not just 2 guys talking on a podcast. We want it to be a book club.
Yeah.
So do that.
Yeah. So this month, you guys voted for The Satanic Verses by Salman Rushdie. And the summary from Goodreads reads, just before dawn, one winter's morning, a hijacked jetliner explodes above the English Channel. Through the falling debris, 2 figures, Jibril Farishta, the biggest star in India, and Saladin Chamcha, an expatriate returning from his first visit to Bombay in 15 years, plummet from the sky, washing up on the snow-covered sands of an English beach, and proceed through a series of metamorphoses, dreams, and revelations.
So, the Satanic Verses. Rushdie's book has been in the esteemed pleasure of being one of the most controversial books of all time. This book was banned in many Muslim countries. I think 12 countries it was banned in at one point. The Ayatollah of Iran actually issued a fatwa against Rushdie for well, we'll get into it, for a lot of the discussion of Islam and some of its most important players that go on in this book.
Yeah, someone was actually killed in the course of this.
Yeah, one of the translators, I believe, the Japanese translator, right?
That's right.
I think it was. Yeah.
Yep.
So before we go any further, I think we just need to start this thing off with a disclaimer that, first of all, we are 2 white guys, neither of which is Muslim. And I don't think we are approaching this novel or this discussion with like the intent on really like diving into Islam and getting a deep analysis of it. Neither of us has the knowledge for that, I believe. We have to discuss the controversy. We have to discuss what we think Rushdie is saying about the religion and religion in general with this novel, but that's not what we're gonna try to do here. I don't think that would be fair to us or to the religion.
Yeah, I think my mentality about this is that I'm viewing this as a cultural artifact that I don't and can't really fully understand, but I'm going to try to appreciate it to the degree that I can.
Yeah, which is, I think, a great segue to our overall impressions of this book before we move into the detail, Matt, because I think you're absolutely right that this is and was, for me, a pretty daunting task. Not just the presenting of this book and the analysis of this book, but even the reading of this book at times. So I wanted to hear how this book went over for you, how the process of reading it was and thinking about it was, and what your overall thoughts were.
Yeah, I guess I have a few things to say. It was a very difficult read, but very rewarding. And I don't know if you can say that about a lot of books. And I'll also add that I'm glad we're having this discussion because I I've read it over the last month. I took my time, I read it slowly, and I really don't know what I think about this book in a lot of
Mm-hmm.
ways. Like I have my thoughts on it, but I have I've had such a hard time thinking about like, okay, but what is my overall opinion? So I'm hoping by the end of this conversation that will have crystallized a bit more. But just succinctly, it's difficult in places. Um, it's beautiful. It's enchanting. You think about it when you're not reading it. You don't know what to make of half of it, but you try to. You struggle with it, and it's definitely one of those pieces of literature that I think is going to stick with me.
Yeah, I think I'm right there with you. This book was a challenge for me too. This was not an easy read. This was not a book I could sit down with for 4 hours at a time if I had nothing to do on a Saturday and just lose myself in it. I wrestled with this book, and I think it was in the end for the better. I really loved so much of what I saw here. I think Rushdie is such a talented writer in how he uses all the different techniques that I think we're going to get into as we really dive into them to tell this fascinating story that's saying so many things. I think the most daunting thing for me is finding a way in a 2 hour book discussion on a Friday night to fit in everything that I think he's trying to say with this book. And I don't think we're going to do it. There's just too much here, especially since we've only experienced the book for the first time. I could probably sit and read this book 4 or 5 more times and still be pulling different things from it. It's just one of those novels, and I felt that with American Gods last month, and I think it's that like on overdrive, because as much as I like Neil Gaiman, I think he's a very gifted writer. I think Salman Rushdie's better, and he's exploring maybe some more complex uh, human wide issues, and it is a fascinating book to think about, and I'm hoping to talk about. I agree with you that for the most part, when I sit down to have these discussions, when I sit down to kind of pull the slides together and plan, I have a pretty good handle on what my thoughts on the story are, and I I feel as it makes me feel unprepared, but I don't think I'm unprepared. It's just the nature of the book.
Yeah, no, I didn't envy you the task of having to pull the slides because
Yeah,
as I was reading it, I was like, look, I can name the themes of this book. I can say what they are, but I don't know if I can say what they mean. I don't know if I
yeah,
can actually say what this book is trying to say.
yeah.
And I think some of that is intentional ambiguity on the book's part, and some of it is me being dense, and maybe we can sort that out as we go through it.
Sure, yeah. So without further ado, let's jump into it.
All right.
All right, so this is the first. Here's our first slide, and I'll read it, and then we'll talk about it.
Okay.
There were they were the only not a good start, Scott. They were the only survivors of the wreck, the ones who fell from Boston and lived. They were found washed up on a beach. The more voluble of the two, the one in the purple shirt, swore his wild ramblings that they had walked upon the water, that the waves had borne them gently to the shore. But the other, whose head was a soggy bowler hat clung as if by magic, denied this. God, we were lucky, he said. How lucky can you get? I know the truth, obviously. I watched the whole thing. As to omnipresence and potence, I'm making no claims at present, but I can manage this much, I hope. Chamcha willed it, and Farishta did what he was willed. Which was the miracle worker? Of what type? Angelic, satanic, was Farishta's song? Who am I? Let's put it this way. Who has the best tunes? These were the first words Gabriel Farishta said when he awoke on the snow-bound English beach with the improbability of starfish by his ear. Born again, Spoono, you and me. Happy birthday, mister. Happy birthday to you. Whereupon Saladin Chamcha coughed, sputtered, opened his eyes, and as befitted a newborn babe, burst into foolish tears. So, I think before we can talk about this book as a whole, we have to talk about this first chapter that ends in this moment, and how this first chapter kind of is possibly the most challenging chapter of the book.
Yes. I mean, when I started, I did it on audiobook, as is my habit. And for the first, 10 minutes, I was just like, what the hell is going
Yeah,
on?
yeah,
And you wonder if you're going to be this disoriented the whole time. But really, it's just that he's doing kind of an in media res thing. and he's doing it with such florid language and these sentences with like seven clauses,
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
it's really hard for your brain to grasp onto it. I mean, it's got to be intentional that the third sentence of the book is like 4 lines long, right? Like he's getting you prepared for what his style is going to be like and what you're getting into.
Oh, absolutely. Because I think you're absolutely right that after this first chapter, the style of the book shifts a bit, and it goes to some more. The following chapters have a lot more traditional prose, and they still have some of this really outlandish, descriptive, multi clause sentences mixed in, but there is some of that traditional stuff that you can really grab onto. But yeah, he's throwing you in the deep end, and Sergey says that's magical realism for you, and it absolutely is. That is, I think, the anchor of everything he's doing is anchoring in that idea of magical realism, and I think it's one of the reasons why the book works so well, and it's probably something we're going to be talking about so much throughout this episode. But I want to talk about this narrator for a bit with you, Matt, while we're
Sure.
here, while he's defining himself here. So the narrator like never really fully reveals himself throughout the story, who he is, what he's doing. But at the same time, I think he also does pretty much reveal himself here at the beginning. I mean, who has the best tunes? Who has the best the thing's called Satanic verses, and he's talking about tunes and poems, and all of this is pretty obvious that our narrator is the evil one, Matt.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, it skirts around defining what these entities actually are. And
Right.
I don't know if we're gonna really get into it because, man, this is a dense book. But there's there's a lot of instances where like the story itself casts doubt on whether an angel is actually an angel or whether the devil is actually the devil, and
Yeah.
it injects these other beings which are basically gods, and there's various ways in which you can interpret those events. Are those gods? Are those just manifestations of the devil? The book does not help you out in interpreting that, I don't think. And
Yeah.
so it leaves you really uncertain about a lot of these questions.
Well, and I think the narrator prides himself or itself on the fact that for the most part they stay out of all this,
Hmm.
that they are an observer. I think there's one point in the book where he says, okay, there's one time I intervened, there's one time I actually came into the story, and it's in the form of God, but
Right.
he won't tell Jabril which God he is, and and he's just talking to him. But other than that, like everything that's happening here, even when human beings are conversing with the angels to get orders and ideas about what we should be doing and what we should not be doing, this narrator is staying out of it,
Mhm.
completely out of it. He's just observing, and I think that's a very specific design to feed into what I think Rushdie is saying about these people that communicate with angels and how much of it is communicating with a powerful being and how much of it is just getting your desires reflected back on you.
Yeah, and we may get to that slide later, but there's the book specifically states that there's something in the Bible says that the angels are basically ordered to be subservient to humans,
Right.
and thus they become more of a channel for us to destroy ourselves than anything else.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
Okay,
All right.
so
Next slide.
next slide we meet Jibril Farishta, and the book chooses for us to meet Jibril through his assumed identity and through showing how the world reacts to that person going missing. So here we go. After he departed, the ubiquitous images of his face began to rot. On the gigantic, lurid colored hoardings from which he had watched over the populace, his lazy eyelids started flaking and crumbling, drooping further and further until his irises looked like two moons sliced by clouds, or by the soft knives of his long lashes. Finally, the eyelids fell off, giving a wild, bulging look to his painted eyes. Outside the picture palaces of Bombay, mammoth cardboard effigies of Jibril were seen to decay and list. Dangling limply on their sustaining scaffolds, they lost arms, withered, snapped at the neck. His portraits on the covers of magazines acquired the pallor of death, a nullity about the eye, a hollowness. At last, his images simply faded off the printed page, so that the shiny covers of Celebrity and Society and Illustrated Weekly went blank, at the bookstalls, and their publishers fired the printers and blamed the quality of the ink. Even on the silver screen itself, high above his worshippers in the dark, that supposedly immortal physiognomy began to putrefy, blister, and bleach. Projectors jammed unaccountably every time he passed through the gate. His films ground to a halt, and the lamp heat of the malfunctioning projectors burned his celluloid memory away, a star gone supernova, with a consuming fire spreading outwards, as was fitting, from his lips. It was the death of God, or something very like it. It had not the outsized face suspended. For had not that outsized face suspended over its devotees in the artificial cinematic light shone like that of some supernal entity that had its being at least halfway between the mortal and the divine? More than halfway, many would have argued, for Jabril had spent the greater part of his unique career incarnating, with absolute conviction, the countless deities of the subcontinent in the popular genre of movies known as theologicals.
It's hard to read this stuff, huh, Matt? I can't believe someone did it for an audiobook.
Yeah.
I can't imagine
I,
how many stumbles and retakes they had to do.
I don't know how you write like this. I haven't done it, but I had this idea while reading. I was like, I want to try to write like this and see if I don't mean write like to this level of quality. I just mean write in sentences that ramble on like this, but
Yeah,
still make sense.
I feel like it must require like a really supreme amount of control to not lose yourself as you write, or rather just a lot of editing, like where you have to go back and reform and restructure the sentences as you go. I wonder if there's like you write 5 sentences and then he goes back and edits it into one sentence and says I can fit that in a clause. Get out of that a separate sentence. I don't know.
Yeah, that'd
It's
be
really
interesting.
fascinating.
I kind of want to watch some interviews of him or read about his process a bit because
Yeah.
it is very unusual and fascinating to me.
Yeah. One of the things I really wanted to talk about here in this slide is that idea of magical realism and how I think Rushdie continually like moves us in between what is clearly the real world and then into the magical world. And it's this is such a good example of it because we start off here as just this images of him beginning to rot and crumbling, and that, I mean, it could easily be explained by just the passage of time. You have a poster up on a wall, and over time, if the person's not making any new movies or the poster's not replaced by anything else, it's going to collapse and rot. There's something real practical and real about that. But as we move along in these description, it shifts to his images literally just fading off of magazine covers as they're still in the stands, to the point where the printers are being blamed for the quality of the ink, and we move into this supernatural where he's just literally magically disappearing from everywhere that he is, as if he's completely gone. And they describe this as the death of a god. This, like, he is being erased from existence. And I think that's so fascinating.
Yeah, there's so much going on here, and this is one instance of that ambiguity where the book is casting him as something um, holy or elevated, and at the same time, we know we find out later in the book that he's also mentally ill. So
Mm-hmm.
you're never quite sure what is real and what is not. Although this is just the narration, so when it's just the narration, I tend to trust like, okay, he wants us to accept that this is actually happening.
Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah,
think that's interesting. Um, the thing I find so fascinating about Jabril, and I think that's going to come back again and again as we compare him to Saladin, is this idea that he, especially here at the beginning, he is already playing a role, and it's a role kind of thrust upon him. So like these two people go through this metamorphosis, and one of them, Chamcha, changes in a big way. He like physically reforms into something new. Jabril here doesn't really ever change. I mean, we see he gets like a slight halo behind his head, but there's no big transformation, and part of that is just the difference between how angels and demons are represented. But um, he's this is a role he's taken on. The role of Jabril is a role he that was kind of thrust upon him from the beginning. And after this, we didn't pull a slide on it, but we kind of learn his entire past, and we learn the person he used to be and how he became this person. And this difference between choosing to put on a role and kind of having a role thrust upon you, I think is one of the most important distinctions between these two characters.
yeah, that's interesting because I remembered that Jabril is not his real name, right?
Right.
But but the book never really, after that bit of that short bit where we learn his backstory, the book never goes back to it. He never reclaims that identity. He just
He's
is Jabril now.
he's not interested in that identity,
Yeah.
and that I think he he uses that name for the plane just as because it's a hidden name that nobody knows. But yeah, he's not interested in reclaiming his old identity. That's not the movements of his story. He is very much interested in being this angel. I mean, I guess that we should say that Jibril, for those that don't know, is the Islamic phrasing of the angel Gabriel, and I think Farishta is just it just means angel.
Uh-huh.
So his
Yeah.
name is literally like Gabriel the angel.
Right. And
Uh,
and basically the reason why he has this stage name is that, as this slide says, he is this giant movie star who is known for almost exclusively playing gods
yeah,
and deities of the various Indian religions. So it makes sense for him to have a name like that, and he's like a huge movie star, and his disappearance makes a big splash, obviously.
yeah, and I want to I don't think we can overemphasize how big of a movie star he's supposed to be. I've been involved in seeing some very 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 popular Indian cinema films and tweeting about them and
Uh-huh.
having fans of the star of the movie go nuts and retweet. Like the most retweets I've ever gotten in my life on Twitter is when I just talked about this random 20-year-old Indian film I saw at a film festival because India is really they really get behind their movie stars. Like they do worship them, not to the level of deity, but about as close as you can get. And it's like this exciting thing that is it's cool. It's awesome to see. They really love these people. So I think this is the reason why we're kind of spending all this time on here is because I think Rushdie wanted to make very clear that this is the star upon all stars in Indian cinema. This is a
Right.
big, big, big important guy.
Yeah, I mean, it specifically said he's on the cover of all these magazines.
Right,
So,
right.
yeah.
But it's not even it's not comparable to our biggest stars. It's above and beyond that.
Right. Right.
All right, now we meet our other character. We meet Saladin Chamcha. Am I saying that right? You got all the things. You got all the audiobooks. So I apologize for anyone. I'm going to pronounce some of these names wrong. I'm going to try my best, but
I think Saladin is probably right.
yeah.
I might say Saladin sometimes. I'm not sure. I probably won't be doing the accents this time because I don't think that would
No,
work
I,
well.
I, I wouldn't
Yeah.
want to try. Yeah.
No.
Um, Once the flight to London had taken off, thanks to his magical trick of crossing two pairs of fingers on each hand and rotating his thumbs, the narrow 40ish fellow who sat in a non smoking window seat watched the city of his birth fall away from him like old snakeskin, allowed a relieved expression to pass briefly across his face. The face was handsome, in somewhat sour patrician fashion, with long, thick, downturned lips like those of a disgusted turbot, and thin eyebrows arching sharply over the eyes that watched the world with a kind of alert contempt. Mr. Saladin Chamcha had constructed this face with care. It had taken him several years to get it just right, and for many more years now he had thought of it simply as his own. Indeed, he had forgotten what he had looked like before it. Furthermore, he had shaped himself a voice to go with the face, a voice whose languid, almost lazy vowels contrasted disconcertingly with the sawn-off abruptness of the consonants. The combination of face and voice was a potent one. But, during his recent visit to his hometown, his first such visit in 15 years, the exact period I should observe of Jabril Farishta's film stardom, there had been a strange and worrying developments. It was unfortunately the case that his voice, the first to go, and subsequently his face, had begun to let him down. So this is our second main character, and I love the contrast between these two people because this is a guy who has completely chosen to construct a persona. Unlike Jabril, who had this persona, this name kind of thrust upon him, he has taken it upon his own. He has constructed this entirely different person, this person that loves England and
Yeah.
wants to escape from what he sees as the horrors of Bombay and India. But even here, even in this first introduction of this guy, we see the basic contradiction in him because it says right here, thanks to his magic trick of crossing two pairs of fingers, one in each hand, and rotating his thumbs, which is something we'll see later in the book, is a superstition he picked up from his father. So he's like this walking contradiction of man who wants to embrace being an Englishman and run away from his former culture and identity, but also is kind of bound to it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so speaking of the audiobook, the voice of the reader when he's reading Saladin's um, speech is this extremely haughty-taughty upper class English voice, except when he starts slipping into his old style of speech, which he does only when he's visiting India
That's
during
awesome.
the different flashbacks. Um, and yeah, I mean, there's a lot of I think these are just wonderful characters,
Yeah.
and like it's so funny because like Jibril is the kind of guy who will like make up a nickname for you and then call you that nickname all the time.
Yeah.
Um, and he's like very guileless actually, and Saladin is maybe actually more relatable as a character. He struggles with identity. He he gets angry and alienates people that he should love, um, and that he should forgive. You know, he has all of these human flaws, these all of these relatable flaws. It seems
Yeah.
like Jibril's story, he's certainly flawed, but his flaws are less relatable. That's not a criticism. I'm just pointing out how these characters are very different, but really great characters in their own ways.
Yeah, and I think the coolest thing about this is how the writing matches that. I think me reading my section was a lot easier than you reading your section, and I think it's because uh, Rushdie writes Chamcha stuff in a much more traditional, plain type of prose. He still does his kind of long sentences. There's one in here. This first sentence in this passage is a long sentence that kind of meanders and picks up on something else before dropping it down and moving back to the main idea of the sentence. But there's much less of it here. It's much more traditional prose. It's much more British traditionalism. You know, it's. I think it's great writing that the writing fits with the character, and as the character kind of dives into more of this magical realism, I think the writing shifts to accommodate that.
Yeah, yeah, I think you're right. I don't think I noticed that, but now that you pointed it out, yeah, because you're getting into Jibril's rather unhinged headspace, and then when you go into the flashbacks, it's almost an entirely different style when you're in like
Yeah,
the dream
I
slash,
think I think the
yeah.
Mahound stuff was actually probably the easiest for me to read, the most traditionally.
Hmm.
Uh, is I'm trying to think of the right word.
It's it,
Prosy.
yeah, it's just kind of a third person story.
Yeah,
It's not particularly trying to
yeah,
carry you away with the words.
yeah. But again, to call attention to the differences between these two characters, I think we see Saladin as a guy who starts out kind of with nothing. I mean, he's the son of what turns out to be a rich man, but we're introduced to him, his past in the story, as he found this wallet on the floor and he's going to get all the money from it, and then his father snatches it away only to give it to him later, but in the most cruel torturous way possible.
Yeah.
But it's so weird because Jibril started off with nothing, but was kind of given, just continually given stuff as he went, whereas Chamcha kind of had a silver spoon, as much of a silver spoon as that you could in this area, while still like having to fight for everything he had. And it's such an interesting difference between these two characters.
Well, yeah, because Saladin rejected everything of his father
Right.
and his upbringing out of, I suppose, what you could simplistically call pride. Yeah, I mean, there's a huge amount to be said in how these two characters have sort of inverse character arcs. That they
Yeah.
start out in opposite places and end up in opposite places in many different ways, not just in terms of, you know, the amount of money they had when they started out.
Sure, and I think we have a slide that's going to very specifically compare and contrast them near the end of the story.
Yeah.
But um, I think one of the most interesting things about it, though, is that it both leads them to godlessness. They start out this story, this event, the explosion, neither believing in God. They were both raised Muslim, have both kind of abandoned the religion, and I'm not even sure by the end of it you could say either of them. Like, I don't think the story is about people embracing religion. Certainly not. Um, I think Rushdie has very complicated thoughts about religion, and which we will get into as we move into some of the more targetedly offensive parts of the book.
Yeah.
But
Speaking of which,
yeah, I guess that's a great time to move into him.
yeah, so after we're introduced to both of the two main characters and we spend some time learning their backstories, we then witness the hijacking and explosion of the aircraft that they were traveling in together. Then the story shifts focus and we enter one of Jibril's extended dream sequences. This one about Mahund, a certain prophet operating out of the city of Jahilia. So in this slide, we meet Mahund, the businessman. Looks as he should, high forehead, eagle nose, broad in the shoulders, narrow in the hip, average height, brooding, dressed in two pieces of plain cloth, each 4 ells in length, one draped around his body, the other over his shoulder, large eyes, long lashes like a girl's. His strides can seem too long for his legs, but he's a light-footed man. Orphans learn to be moving targets, develop a rapid walk, quick reactions, hold your tongue caution. Up through the thorn bushes of Oppo balsam trees, he comes, scrabbling on boulders. This is a fit man, no soft-bellied usurer here. And yes, to state it again, takes an odd sort of business wallet to cut off into the wilds up Mount Cone, sometimes for a month at a stretch, just to be alone. His name, a dream name, changed by the vision. Pronounced correctly, it means he for whom thanks should be given, but he won't answer to that here. Nor, though he's well aware of what they call him, to his nickname in Jahilia down below, he who goes up and down Old Coney. Here he is neither Muhammad nor Mohammed, has adopted instead the demon tag the Farangus hung around his neck. To turn insult into strength, Whigs, Tories, blacks all chose to wear with pride the names they were given in scorn. Likewise, our mountain climbing motivated solitary is to be the medieval baby frightener, the devil's synonym, Mahund. That's him, Mahund the businessman, climbing his hot mountain in the Hijaz. The mirage of a city shines below him in the sun.
So Rushdie just picked one of the most offensive names for Muhammad that you could. This is what I think. This is what the Crusaders during the Crusade times insultingly called Muhammad. Um, it's like it's very interesting. I mean, like he makes the case for why here to turn insults and strengths into pride to escape from the scorn. He adopted the name, but I can see why this pissed a lot of people off, Matt.
Yeah, I mean, I think even just representing Muhammad as a fictional character and in a not
Sure.
completely flattering way. I mean, this first description is somewhat flattering actually, but it doesn't persist to be that way. I don't
No,
think.
no. But it's so funny because like the first section, you're like, I wonder why this angered Muslims so much, and then I got to the part two. I think I sent a picture of it to you
Yeah.
where the title of the section is Mahound, and I'm like, oh yeah, I recognize that word. That is not a flattering word for the prophet.
Yeah.
Um, so I guess to get into that, obviously Muhammad and the Satanic Verses is a huge part of this book, the Satanic Verses. But I wonder, Rushdie claims, and I read about this when Rushdie claims he did not set out to offend, that this is not a story about destroying Islam as a religion. This is a story about immigration and what that does to culture and what
Into individuals
yeah, exactly.
and
And
struggles with identity and all of, like
sure,
I think he was probably not at all aiming to write like a scathing critique of Islam. I think he just unfortunately wrote a really good book that became popular. If this book hadn't been, regarded as a great piece of literature, then no one would have ever heard of it, and
sure,
there wouldn't have been a problem.
sure. And I do think I think Rushdie's opinion of these stories, of the story of the founding of Islam, the story of the Muslim religion, belongs to not just Muslims. It belongs to the culture. He's very interested in culture and how culture changes and is morphed and migrated by both by both immigration and by colonialism. And I think Rushdie honestly feels that these stories don't just belong to the people that believe in them as religious doctrine, but people who are raised with them as stories. So if he wants to relate these stories to the characters that are going through this identity crisis, they search for who they are, lost between the new world and their old one, that's fair game to him.
Yeah.
And I certainly agree with that. I mean, I would say that as much as America is not a Christian nation, Christianity has not rooted, but it has a place in the culture of America. And for a lot of old, mostly white Americans, but so I think that there's certain truth to that.
Yeah, I mean, in India is a very different place. I'm
Right.
again speaking mostly from what I've read, but
Yeah.
it's a country with a lot of religious strife. Actually, there's a large Muslim population,
Sure.
a
Sure.
large Hindu population. I think there are other sects and subsects of those religions, and there's been a lot of violence, a lot of strife, and so you can imagine someone. I mean, we care a lot about religion in this country, regardless of what our religion is, because religion impacts our lives.
Yeah.
And I think in India, it's the same, if not
I think it's
more
I think it's
dramatic.
much more so. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So
So
yeah, I mean, so I definitely get that idea. So I generally agree with you that he did not set up here to say it's like I'm gonna get you Islam. But also he makes choices like this that I think are not unintentional. I don't think uh, Salman Rushdie thinks very highly of the Muslim religion,
and yeah,
and I think he lets that slip
I think we
several
should, yeah,
times.
I mean, we should maybe point out that he was, raised Muslim and his
Yeah,
family was Muslim. And so this is the critique of someone criticizing something from the inside or having
sure,
exited it, I think, which is, I think, should be considered differently from someone just attacking something from the outside.
absolutely, absolutely, yeah. All right, I think we spent enough time meeting our guy. Let's see what he does.
Okay.
So this is the Satanic verses are read aloud, and I'll do this, and then we'll talk about that story because it's one that I didn't know about until I read this book, and I'm curious if you did. At this point, without any trace of hesitation or doubt, he recites two further verses. Have you thought upon Lat and Uzzah and Manat the third, the other? After the first verse, Hin gets to her feet. The grandee of Jalia is already standing very straight, and Mahound, with silent eyes, recites, they are the exalted birds, and their intercession is desired indeed. As the noise, shouts, cheers, scandal, cries of devotion to the goddess Alat swells and bursts within the marquee, the already astonished congregation beholds the doubly sensational spectacle of the grandee Abu Simbel placing his thumbs upon the lobes of his ears, fanning out the fingers of both his hands, and uttering in a loud voice the formula Allahu Akbar, after which he falls to his knees and presses a deliberate forehead to the ground. His wife Hind immediately follows his lead. The water carrier Khalid has remained by the open tent flap throughout these events. Now he stares in horror as everyone gathered there, both the crowd in the tent and to the overflowing of men and women outside, begin to kneel, row by row, the movement rippling outwards from behind as the grandee as though they were pebbles thrown into the lake, until the entire gathering, outside the tent as well as in, kneels bottom in air before the shut-eye prophet, who has recognized the patron deities of the town. The messenger himself remains standing, as if loath to join the assembly in its devotions. Burning into tears, the water carrier flees into the empty heart of the city of sands. His teardrops, as he runs, burn holes in the earth as they contain some harsh, corrosive acid. Mahound remains motionless. No trace of moisture can be detected on the lashes of his unopened faces. So, did you know about this historical argument, the Satanic verses, that this there are historical reports that this actually happened?
No, I had never heard of it. It seems like the veracity of the story is very much uncertain. Um,
Sure. Yeah. I think there's uh, were if it did happen, there were concerted efforts to erase the
yeah,
existence of it.
right.
Um,
So should we explain what that is exactly?
yeah.
Yeah, so the basically it was made clear to Mahund that it would be really nice if he could basically get quote unquote get Archangel Gabriel to tell him that the three like patron deities of the city, Lat, Uza, and Manat, um, 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 should have some like privileged place in the order of what was going to be Islam, but what isn't being called Islam at this point.
Yeah.
And he goes to the mountain, and he says he comes down after struggling with basically with the character Jabril in the dream. He comes down and says, "Yeah, that's what happened. Gabriel told me that um, these three goddesses should be revered, just not as highly as Allah." And then later, are we gonna have a slide on that, or can I just explain it now?
I think we have a slide of him
Yeah.
wrestling with Jabril, but we
Okay.
can
Yeah.
go ahead. We can explain it now.
Yeah. So he later changes his mind and decides that the entity that told him that that the that the goddesses should be respected was actually Satan deceiving him, and he retracts them, which is kind of suspicious. And so like the reason the water carrier runs crying into the desert is that he actually believes that Mahund has compromised his integrity here.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that this book has a lot to say about is an unflinching, uncompromisable idea, and we're going to see that echoed again and again throughout the story. I think most powerfully with the journey to Mecca on foot that I think Aisha is their name
Uh-huh.
leads her people on in one of the other dreams. But this idea of an idea that is completely uncompromising, completely stiff and unmoving, and what Rushdie thinks of that. And I don't think he has a very high opinion of those kind of ideas. But
Yeah.
so we see here this idea wavers a bit and then kind of refines itself, refines its strength and its uncompromising nature. But I think it's very interesting to tie this into that idea of immigration and colonialism and identity, because he's this person that is on the outskirts of town. He has a very small amount of followers. He's not accepted in the group, and he is told by the powers that be, just bend a little bit, like just compromise a little bit, like change who you are a little bit, redefine yourself a little bit, and look, you will be accepted with open arms. And we see in this passage that it's exactly what happens. People fall on the ground, fall on their knees. They're worshiping him. He is suddenly invited into the it group, but he can't that the idea is too powerful to compromise fully, and it kind of leads to death and destruction.
Right. So that's what happens next is like we said, he feels regret for saying the verses, and so he goes to wrestle with Jabril for answers. And here's what happens. In a cave 500 feet below the summit of Mount Cone, Mahund wrestles the archangel, hurling him from side to side. And let me tell you, he's getting in everywhere. His tongue in my ear, his fists around my balls. There was never a person with such a rage in him. He has has to know, sorry, has to know, and I have nothing to tell him. See, it's actually written like that. And I have
Yeah, I
nothing to,
didn't. That was not a mistake on my part.
yeah, and I have nothing to tell him. He's twice as physically fit as I am and four times as knowledgeable, minimum. We may both have taught ourselves by listening a lot, but as a plain to see, as is plain to see, he's an even better listener than me. So we roll, kick, scratch. He's getting cut up quite a bit, but of course my skin stays smooth as a baby. You can't snag an angel on a bloody thorn bush. You can't bruise him on a rock. And they have an audience. There are jinns and afrits and all sorts of spooks sitting on the boulders to watch the fight. And in the sky are the three winged creatures looking like herons or swans or just women, depending on the tricks of the light. Mahun finishes it. He throws the fight. After they had wrestled for hours or even weeks, Mahund was pinned down beneath the angel. It's what he wanted. It was his will filling me up and giving me the strength to hold him down, because archangels can't lose such fights. It wouldn't be right. It's only devils who get beaten in such circs. So the moment I got on top, he started weeping for joy, and then he did his old trick, forcing my mouth open and making the voice, pour out of me again. Made it pour all over him, like sick.
So there's so much going on here
Yeah.
that I don't even know where to start. First of all, one of the things that jumped out at me so much is our narrator moves into first person deliberately during this fight. He is fighting the angel Jabril, and then suddenly it's first person. It's me.
Yeah.
We are rolling and kicking and scratching, and it jumps back and forth. It just, like, suddenly, and they have an audience. Suddenly it's in third person again, but then it jumps back into first person. It was his will filling me up. So it's so interesting to me that here's our narrator, who we're pretty confident is Satan, is evil, and is kind of falling into the angel Jabriel in this moment. And I find that fascinating.
Yeah, thanks for pulling that out because I kind of forgot that the point of view did this here because later Jabril remembers that he was the one who said the words both times.
Right.
And but it actually seems like the devil did kind of worm in there when he said the words the original time.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, I don't know how else to read it other than that, right? That, like, if we have kind of gone pains to hide this person's identity, but we kind of know who it is, and then we very intentionally shift to this first person in this all important moment of the second time, and even more so, like, this idea that Mahound threw the fight. He lost on purpose, and he lost on purpose because he was forcing a situation in which he could get what he actually wanted, which was, tell me something else, give me more information, give me what I want, so I can contradict the thing that I just said because I regretted it. And it's this idea that right here, archangels can't lose such fights. Mahound has to throw the fight because, like, if he were to win, then that wouldn't work. An archangel can't do that. Only a devil who gets beaten in that way. And so it seems like Mahound was winning, realized it couldn't work this way because an archangel would not lose this fight, so he throws it. And so it's almost as if the book is saying that he is on some level aware that the person he is talking with is the devil, is not an archangel, is not Jabriel. And that has just fascinating implications for this whole thing. It's like he's fully aware that he's going back here because he wants an excuse to recant the thing he said.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Even though, um, yeah, I mean, it's fascinating because the basis of it all is it's an uncompromising idea, right?
Right.
But here he seems to be his desire to retract the first thing he said is so intense that he is compromising.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, so did he compromise the first time or is he compromising this time?
Yeah.
And I'm
Well,
not sure if, yeah.
I mean, I think what the book is saying is they're both coming from him. He wanted it the first time, so he got what he wanted because he wanted to compromise because he was tempted by it, and he wanted to recant it the second time, so that's what he got. And it's so fascinating to me that Rushdie might be saying there's this general idea, if this really did happen, if these satanic verses did happen, then the ones that contradict with the idea are the ones that came from Satan, but the ones that reestablished the correct things are the ones that actually came from Jabriel, when this passage is possibly saying that it was the exact opposite of that.
Yeah.
That he was wrestling with Satan in these moments, and it was the contradiction, the contraction that was actually coming from a place of darkness. And I think that is Rushdie's idea about the strict ruliness of Islam in one paragraph. That's his opinion of it.
Yeah, and I think maybe the most sacrilegious aspect of this bit here
Yes.
is that he's, I mean, a lot of it is sacrilegious, but I think the worst part is he did his old trick, forcing my mouth open and making the voice,
Yeah.
capital V,
Yeah.
pour out of me. So basically, it's saying Mahound is the one making the voice of God come out of Jibril like a puppet
Yep.
or the devil, however you wish to frame it.
Yep.
So, and he calls it his old trick, as in, like, is this what he's always doing by implication?
I think by implication, yes, that is
Yeah.
absolutely what he is every time he reports. And I think we're going to get even more heresy as it relates to that later in the book.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, but for now, we wrap up this portion of the story, and we go back to the present. Saladin and Jabril are found by an old lady, Rose Diamond, who takes them both in. But then some police show up and see Saladin as an immigrant and take him away, beat the crap out of him, rip his clothes off, and he is revealed to have transformed. He's got devil horns and he's got the bottom half of a goat. And he's then taken to an institution where he finds other creatures like him. And that's where our slide picks up here. That night, in the greeny light of the mysterious institution, Saladin was awakened by a hiss out of an Indian bazaar. "Tss, you, Beelzebub, wake up." Standing in front of him was a figure so impossible that Chamcha wanted to bury his head under the sheets. Yet he could not, for was he not himself? "That's right," the creature said. "You see, you're not alone." It had an entirely human body, but its head was that of a ferocious tiger, with 3 rows of teeth. "The night guard just often doze off," it explained. "That's how we managed to get to talk." Just then, the voice from one of the other beds, each bed, as Chamcha now knew, was protected by its own ring of screens, wailed loudly. "Oh, if ever a body suffered!" The man-tiger, or manticore as it called itself, gave an exasperated growl. "That moaner, Lisa," it exclaimed. "All they did was make him blind." "Who did what?" Chamcha was confused. "The point is," the manticore continued, "are you going to put up with it?" Saladin was still puzzled. The others seemed to be suggesting that these mutations were the responsibility of whom? How could they be? "I don't see," he ventured. "Who can be blamed?" The manticore ground its 3 rows of teeth in evident frustration. "There's a woman over that way," it said, "who is now mostly water buffalo. There are businessmen from Nigeria who have grown sturdy tails. There's a group of holiday makers from Senegal who were doing no more than changing planes when they were turned into slippery snakes. I myself am in the rag trade. For some years now, I have been a highly paid model based in Bombay, wearing a wide range of suitings and shirtings also. But who will employ me now?" He burst into sudden and unexpected tears. "But how do they do it?" Chamcha wanted to know. "They describe us," the other whispered solemnly. "That's all. They have the power of description, and we succumb to the pictures they construct." So this is the most targeted, I think, examination of how people view immigrants in Rushdie's mind, and how perhaps 1988 the United Kingdom and London viewed the immigrants that were coming into their country. I think I looked it up, and this was a time of a big influx of immigration into the United Kingdom and London specifically, and there was a lot of pushback and backlash to that. And I love how, using that magical realism thing, Rushdie has taken the otherizing, the animalizing of people from different countries and made it literal.
Yeah, right. I don't know if I have much to add there, because this was one thing while I was reading it where I was like, well, I sort of have no idea what's going on in terms of the plot. Like
Right.
why is this asylum here? What is going to come of this? What's funny is almost nothing comes of this.
Yeah.
It really is, I think, almost entirely here to facilitate the metaphor of what it's like to be an immigrant, and how poorly they treated, how poorly they're treated, how they come to feel inhuman, and I suppose he may even be saying they are made inhuman by
Yeah.
the way they're treated.
Not just the way they're treated, the way they're looked at.
Yeah,
I love that last sentence. They describe us. That's all. They have the power of description, and we succumb to the pictures they construct. It's such a powerful message of you treat someone like an animal long enough, and they become the thing that you think they are. And I think that's really powerful and evocative imagery, and I love that it's employed here.
yeah. I will say, and you can contradict me if you got a different take here, but I felt like Chamcha doesn't get any of that. Like Chamcha's not interpreting this as like a metaphor for what it is to be an immigrant. He's just
No.
confused, and like he doesn't even really see himself as an immigrant. Like he is like, no, I did such a good job at being an immigrant that I'm now just an Englishman. And part of what's so shocking to him and distressing to him about this whole ordeal is the police are treating him like an immigrant, and he keeps insisting, no, I'm a British citizen. I'm one of you guys, and they treat him
Yeah.
so poorly that it almost single-handedly ruins his enthusiasm for Londo in London.
I don't think that's a wrong read. I think you're absolutely right. I think part of Saladin's arc is realizing who he is and this person he's been chasing after, and this vision of London and England that he's been chasing after was never actually a reality. I mean, I think we didn't pull a slide, but that he has that whole scene where he's in Bombay, and is her name Zini? I think that's her name.
Yeah, Zeneva Keel.
Yeah, is explained to him like, look, they don't give a shit about you. They don't see you as one of them. Why do you think you're a voice actor and not an actor? They have no respect for you, and it's something he just can't see, and he can't see it here either. I think the book is kind of a slow realization for him. The worse he's treated, the more inhuman he becomes, the more he realizes that they see him, that's the only way they see him, and he kind of has to have everything stripped away from him before he realizes that.
Yeah, yep, that's right.
All right.
So we move on back to one of Jibril's dreams, and this is a different storyline actually. So after being forced to assist the Imam in destroying Alat, Jibril witnesses the story of Mizra Saeed Akhtar and the young Aisha, who eats butterflies and talks to angels. This story ends up being a major one and the one that concludes a big part of the novel, and definitely needs to be set up here. And I don't know, I liked this part of the novel quite a lot,
I did too, yeah.
personally. Yeah. A young woman was squatting on the lawn, holding out her left palm. Butterflies were settling on this surface, while with her right hand she picked them up and put them in her mouth. Slowly, methodically, she breakfasted on the acquiescent wings. Her lips, cheeks, chin were heavily stained by the many different colors that had rubbed off the dying butterflies. When Mirza Said Akhtar saw the young woman eating her gossamer breakfast on his lawn, he felt a surge of lust so powerful that he instantly felt ashamed. It's impossible, he scolded himself. I'm not an animal, after all. The young woman wore a saffron yellow sari wrapped around her nakedness, after the fashion of the poor women of that region, and as she stooped over the butterflies, the sari, hanging loosely forwards, bared her small breasts to the gaze of the transfixed zamindar. Mirza Said stretched out his hand to grip the balcony railing, and the slight movement of his white kurta must have caught her eye because she lifted her head quickly and looked right into his face. And then there's kind of a paragraph break. With Mahound, there was always a struggle. With the Imam, slavery. But with this girl, there is nothing. Jibril is inert, usually asleep in the dream, as he is in life. She comes upon him under a tree or in a ditch, hears what he isn't saying, takes what she needs, and leaves. What does he know about cancer, for example? Not a solitary thing. All around him, he thinks as he half dreams, half wakes, are people hearing voices, being seduced by words, but not his, never his original material. Then whose? Who is whispering in their ears, enabling them to move mountains, halt clocks, diagnose disease? He can't work it out.
So we need to introduce the person, which is why I include the first half. But the second half is really what I want to focus my talking about, because I find this implication fascinating. Like we kind of stop here and say there's three different ways people communicate with Jibril. There is Mahound, who is always, it's always a fight, sometimes a little wrestle. The Imam, who is a story we kind of just skipped over because we didn't have enough time, but he just takes Jibril and bends him to his will. And then with this girl, there is nothing. And I love this as like a metaphor of the different ways in which we use religion in their lives. There's people that struggle with religion, struggle with faith. There's people that just bend it to their will and use it. And then there's some people who just kind of are just very casually exist with it. They pick the parts they like and the parts they need and the parts that help them in whatever they want, and they kind of just leave the rest. And it's such a fascinating way of exploring religion in modern day life and how we use it.
Yeah, I feel like you could make a lot of the difference between slavery and nothing because the Imam doesn't seem to be satisfied with just doing lip service to faith and then doing whatever he wants. He actually seems to want to be right, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Well, and he wants to use the religion and the power to he wants to bend it to his will to
Yeah,
use it to seek power.
yeah. Whereas the girl is all about sort of just doing what she believes the religion is telling her to do, even if we're not even sure if it actually is.
And it's not like I love this here. Like who is whispering in their ears, enabling to move mountains, halt clocks, diagnose diseases? It's themselves.
Yeah.
It's just themselves.
Yeah.
You're doing it yourself. Like what does he know about cancer, for example? Not a solitary thing. This is the lady who will later go to Mirza's wife and say, "You have cancer. I have seen it. I have talked to Jibril, and he says you have cancer, and the only way to cure it is to walk to Mecca." And here's Jibril saying, "I don't know anything about cancer.
Yeah.
This isn't coming from me."
Right.
That word usage of the hears what isn't saying he isn't saying. She comes upon him under a tree or in a ditch and hears what he isn't saying,
Yeah.
takes what she needs and leaves. And that's such a powerful look at how we employ religion in our lives.
Yeah. No, I love that.
We'll come back to this lady.
Yep.
All right. Now we're back with. Oh, that's true. Sergey says also a great metaphor for Farishta being an actor. He's reciting lines. They're never his lines. He doesn't write them. He's just reciting them.
Yeah.
It's meaningless to him.
Yeah.
He's just playing a role.
Yeah.
That's
Exactly.
a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so we're back with Chamcha, and having escaped the institution, he's reuniting with all his old friends, only to find that his former treasured life of an Englander is now gone. His wife doesn't want anything to do with him anymore. He's lost his job, and he reaches out to Mimi, the other voice actor he knew, who he couldn't be with, Matt, because she's Jewish. He couldn't be with her because she's Jewish, even though he's an Englishman, not Indian, and he's not Muslim anymore. But no, can't be with this woman because she's Jewish.
Right.
Which is, again, the contradiction of Chamcha.
Yeah.
But she teaches him a little bit about life. He wanted to say, "Mimi, you're all I've got." He managed, however, only to piss her off. "I wanted to warn you about Billy," was what he said. She went icy. "Chamcha, listen up. I'll discuss this with you one time because behind all your bullshit, you do maybe care for me a little. So comprehend, please, that I am an intelligent female. I have read Finnegan's Wake, and I am conversant with postmodern critiques of the West, e.g., that we have here a society capable only of pastiche, a flattened world. When I become the voice of the bottle of the bubble bath, I am entering flatland knowingly, understanding what I am doing and why. Viz, I am earning cash. And as an intelligent woman able to do 15 minutes on stoicism and more on Japanese cinema, I say to you, Chamcha, that I am fully aware of Billy Boy's rep. Don't teach me about exploitation. We had exploitation when you, plural, were running around in skins. Try being Jewish, female, and ugly sometimes. You'll beg to be black. Excuse my French. Brown." So I love this the most because I think this critique of our society as just becoming a pastiche is kind of like what this book is, Matt. Like, this book is kind of a pastiche. It borrows so much. It's constant references to both Western and Eastern cultural items, and I think that's one of the things that makes it so hard to read because if you're caught up on your Eastern cultural references, the Western ones might go over your head, and vice versa.
Yeah.
This book is kind of a pastiche, and I think it's Rushdie being very critical of society through his construction of the book. I find it fascinating.
Yeah, there's also a pastiche of points of view. Actually, this was what was most impressive to me about the book, period, was the fact that he has, I don't know, a dozen or more characters, probably far more than that, and I'm just kind of forgetting some because the book is so long, who all have their own sort of unique life philosophy. Like this woman here, she's not saying anything that anyone else in the book is saying. Like he's not yelling his theme at you from 100 characters who are all saying the same thing. All of his characters argue, they contradict each other, they have different ideas about how things work or how things should be. They have different personalities, they have different character flaws, and like when you come upon this bit of the book, yeah, it's of a piece with his sort of criticism of society, like you're saying, but it's also sort of mocking Chamcha's point of view. which you haven't been in Chamcha's head necessarily, but you've been following him around,
Yeah.
and so you're like you it's very unsettling to be continually sort of pushed by different characters saying like, oh, you think you know what you're talking about? Well, from my point of view, you're an idiot, and that sort of happens continually in the book. Actually, we have especially female characters have a habit of kind of coming out of the blue and being like, hey, male character who we're focusing on right now, you're being an idiot. Like I think four that happens like four different times off the top of my head.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. That's a good point. Yeah, and I think this is so targeted toward Chamcha, right? I love this line of when I become the voice of a bottle of bubble bath, I am entering flatland knowingly, which we know for a fact Chamcha is not. Chamcha has kind of built himself and this life up as he is the most noblest of people. He is reaching for the purest of English life, and this all is very important and matters. Mimi has no such illusions, and
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, it's like there was this whole tangent where him and her started like their voice actors together. They started a TV show together where they were going to be in costumes, but actually on the screen. And to him, he didn't see why this wouldn't work, which was delusional on his part because the fact was that at this point in history, there was just no way that an Indian man was going to be like anywhere near the lead role of a TV show in
Yeah.
England.
And it is the only reason he is successful as a voice actor in this world is because he has the ability to make his voice sound as far away from Indian as possible.
Yeah, right. Okay, that was fun. Um, so uh, so yeah, so we're back with Chamcha again. So Chamcha, instead of expressing his anger and disappointment in healthy ways, focuses it on one man, Jibril, and the effect of this is to return him to human form. Who should the devil blame but the archangel Gabriel? The creature on the sleeping bags opens its eyes. Smoke began to issue from its pores. The face on every one of the waxwork dummies was the same now, Jibril's face, with its widow's peak, and its long, thin, saturnine good looks. The creature bared its teeth and let out a long, foul breath, and the waxworks dissolved into puddles of empty clothes, all of them, every one. The creature lay back, satisfied, and fixed its mind upon its foe, whereupon it felt within itself the most inexplicable sensations of compressing, suction, withdrawal. It was racked by terrible squeezing pains, and emitted piercing squeal that nobody, not even Michal, who was staying with Hanif in Pinkawalla's apartment above the club, dared to investigate. The pains mounted in intensity, and the creature thrashed and tossed around the dance floor, wailing almost piteously, until at length, granted respite, it fell asleep. When Mishal, Hanif, and Pinkwalla ventured into the clubroom several hours later, they observed a scene of frightful devastation, tables sent flying, chairs broken in half, and, of course, every waxwork, good and evil, Topsy and Legree, melted like tigers into butter. And at the center of the carnage, sleeping like a baby, no mythological creature at all, no iconic thing of horns and hell's breath, but Mr. Saladin Chamcha himself, apparently restored to his old shape, mother naked but of entirely human aspect and proportions, humanized, is there any other option but to conclude, by the fearsome concentration of his hate. He opened his eyes, which still glowed pale and red.
So I wanted to discuss this with you because I wanted to parse out what you think the story is saying by this idea that focused, charged, concentrated anger is what returns him to his human form, and what is that saying about humanity, and what is that saying about this mask, this person that he's created?
Well, I think my first thought was that it's saying that hating someone is human,
Yeah.
and basically up to this point, to harken back to the asylum full of the different mythological creatures who were actually immigrants, he was letting the fact that the English police officers were otherizing him basically turn him into a devil. Like that's one interpretation of what was happening there.
Mm-hmm.
Their actions did that to him, and he internalized it because he couldn't accept that he wasn't British, that he wasn't English, and he has finally chosen something to blame all of this on, because all this terrible stuff has happened to him. Like, we didn't
Yeah.
go into it, but like he was treated absolutely terribly, um, and had to go to the asylum. Like you said, lost his job, lost his wife, and was sort of like mocked and just had to live in like a tiny room. And
Well,
once
and
he,
his devil form has kind of become like the symbol of the resistance
yeah,
against the British, which is the exact type of thing he doesn't want it to be,
yeah,
because he doesn't he's still, even at this hour, fully supportive of this idea that he is the proper British gentleman.
right. And so I think that like choosing someone external to him to focus all of his rage at and hate and blame has like purged him of this frame of mind where he was being othered, and he's now just completely focused on hating this person. So he's not suffering anymore because he's found someone to hate, which is a true, very tragic aspect of humans. Like, we
Yeah.
once we find someone to blame for something, oh man, that is the best thing that can happen if you're struggling, right? If you're struggling with something and you feel responsible and it's hurting you, find somebody to blame for it. You'll feel
Yeah.
great.
That is very true. It is. I mean, that's what we do with immigrants. That's why we otherize. That's why we animalize immigrants, right? It's like, it's not our fault. It's not our government that's failed us. It's these people coming in. It's these people coming in to take our jobs and ruin everything for us. That's exactly what people do all the time, and he is doing the same thing. He is turning his ire towards an immigrant. Like,
Yeah.
part of the reason he hates Jabril so much is because Jabril is having this good time in London, from his perspective at least, and he hasn't earned it. He shouldn't be here. He doesn't understand how important and hallowed and how much this ground matters, and how what being a Londoner means. And there's a lot of anti-immigration kind of talk coming from here.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah.
All right, so after finishing up with Chamcha for a bit, the story jumps over to Jabril again, who has found Alleluia Cone, the supposed love of his life that he, after a 3-day failed relationship in Bombay, rushed to London to be with. That's why he was on the plane. That's why he abandoned his life in India, was to come be with this person he was with for 3 days. And their relationship, Matt, is complicated.
Yeah.
The flaws in the grand passion of Alleluia Cone and Jabril Farishta were as follows: her secret fear of her secret desire, that is, love, owing to which she was wont to retreat from, even hit violently out at, the very person whose devotion she sought most, and the deeper the intimacy, the harder she kicked, so that the other, having been brought to a place of absolute trust, and having lowered all of his defenses, received the full blow and was devastated. Which indeed is what befell Jabril Farishta, when after 3 weeks of the most ecstatic love-making either of them had ever known, was told without ceremony that he had better find himself somewhere to live, pretty sharpish, because she, Allie, required more elbow room than was presently available. And his overweening possessiveness and jealousy, of which he himself had been wholly unaware, owing to his never previous having thought of a woman as a treasure that had to be guarded at all costs against the piratical hordes who would naturally be trying to purloin her, and of which more would be said almost instantly. And the fatal flaw, namely Jabril Farishta's imminent realization, or, if you will, insane idea, that he truly was nothing less than an archangel in human form, and not just any archangel, but the angel of the recitation, the most exalted, now that Shaitan had fallen, of them all. So, I love this so much, and I love this as another example of the magical realism of the book, right? Because we start this off, and we kind of tick down this list of relationship problems. The first is, she has abandonment issues. She's worried about being hurt and therefore lashes out against people she has feelings for. He has jealousy issues. But then we slip into that magical realism and say, oh, also, he thinks he's really a real life angel. And that's a pretty big problem, too.
Yeah. I want to, before we move on from this, I want to point out the names. Her last name
Sure,
is
yeah.
Cone,
Which is the mountain
which
that
is the
the
mountain,
hound, yeah.
and her name is Alleluia, which is a religious name, and then her nickname is Allie, which I believe is also one of the other characters. Am I wrong? Maybe,
Probably not. There's so much repetitiveness and circling of names amongst all these characters.
yeah,
I would not be surprised.
yeah. So everything means something. I'll also add that there's one period on this page.
That's true. This is all technically one
Yeah,
sentence.
right. Yeah, so this is another thing I love about this book, and it recurs over and over. You have characters who are their own worst enemy, right? Like
Right.
they have they're people who you love. Like you, it's so interesting how he's able to get you to love these characters. But they all have something that is like a deep part of them that they can't do anything about, like her tendency to push back against people when she feels like they're getting too close, and his possessiveness and jealousy, which kind of suddenly occurs in the story, um, that that are basically due to like vulnerability and just normal human weakness, and they're sort of very pitiable weaknesses, but they end up blowing everything apart. And the same thing happens with Chamcha and his father, with um, the the um, what's his title, the Zamindar and his wife. Like there's all these
Yeah.
people who are like trapped in this sort of um, doomed love due to the fact that the very thing that makes them capable of love is also makes them extremely vulnerable and prone to acting like idiots.
Yeah, I think that's a really good observation. I hadn't thought about it that way, but you're absolutely right. And I think what Rushdie is saying then about like we tend to when we look at these bad things happen and we look at these as momentous moments of good and evil, true and false, and we'll get into this in a very specific slide where I think he directly calls this out. But these things that we try to explain where they come from, they just come from us. I mean, like, why is their relationship doomed to fail? Because they both are flawed human beings. I mean, and even his fatal flaw, this kind of ridiculous, otherworldly, magical realist flaw that he thinks he's an angel, is just another illustration of his mental fortitude not being fully there, which is a result of a life of pretending, a life of assuming roles, of assuming identities and people that he never really was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah.
Awesome. I like
Okay.
that.
Yeah, that's thanks for pulling that out. All right, so next bit, back in Jabril's dreams, we see the conclusion of Mahound's storyline. Mahound has come to power and is on his way to march to Jahiliya, and this is years later, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
One of his former advisors, Salman, shows up in the city before him, looking for the old poet Bal. And um, yeah, so yeah, I'm just gonna read this now. The faithful lived by lawlessness, but in those years, Mahound, or should one say the archangel Jibril, should one say Allah, became obsessed by law. Amid the palm trees of the oasis, Jibril appeared to the prophet and found himself spouting rules, 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 until the faithful could scarcely bear the prospect of any more revelation. Salman said, rules about every damn thing. If a man farts, let him turn his face to the wind. A rule about which hand to use for the purpose of cleaning one's behind. It was as if no aspect of human existence was to be left unregulated, free. The revelation, the recitation, told the faithful how much to eat, how deeply they should sleep, and which sexual positions had received divine sanction, so that they learned that sodomy and the missionary positions were approved of by the archangel, whereas the forbidden postures included all those in which the female was on top. Jibril further listed the permitted and forbidden subjects of conversation and earmarked the parts of the body which could not be scratched, no matter how unbearable they might itch. He vetoed the consumption of prawns, those bizarre otherworldly creatures which no member of the faithful had ever seen. And Jibril the archangel specified the manner in which a man should be buried and how his property should be divided, so that Salman the Persian got to wondering what manner of god this was that sounded so much like a businessman. That was when he had the idea that destroyed his faith. because he recalled that of course Mahound himself had been a businessman, and a damn successful one at that, a person to whom organization and rules came naturally. So how excessively convenient it was that he should have come up with such a very businesslike archangel who handed down the management decisions of his highly corporate, if non-corporeal, god. Um, yeah. So out of just about everything we've read so far in the book, this quote seems the most specific dig at Islam that you could get.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
this is where when I read quotes by Rushdie saying he was not specifically trying to dig at Islam, I'm like, okay, buddy. Like I understand you didn't construct your whole book to do that, but you left some burns in there. Like this is and I could you could argue that this is not specifically an Islam dig, but is more of a organized religion and how we rulify our spirituality, but come on, dude. This is a dig at Islam.
I mean, yeah, I mean, like if I wrote a book that prominently featured a detailed story about like Jesus being a hypocrite and manipulating people, and then I was like, oh, but it's not really about Christianity, that would probably come off a little bit disingenuous.
Right. Yeah, and I mean like I I I wanted to pull this map because I like some of the I just love this writing so much. I love the word usage here. This highly corporate, if non corporeal God is just a wonderful turn of phrase. Like he is he's such a good writer. I can't get over it. Like
Yeah.
how poetic and like one of the things that surprised me most about this book was the tone because it is such a light-hearted like it reminded me more of Good Omens than it did of American Gods. And I was not expecting a like heavily controversial fatwa inducing book to have this level of tone. I just wasn't expecting it, and it made me enjoy the book so much more.
Yeah, that's a great point because like this book was about an inch away from being very overwrought and exhausting, right? And just unenjoyable. But he made a lot of decisions where it almost never it's never overwrought, I don't think. And
No,
it's rarely exhausting. I will say that there were some parts where I was just like, okay, I'm gonna turn it off now because I'm not absorbing it. But that's
yeah,
um,
I had some parts where I literally read like 10 pages and realized
yeah.
I had not that none of that had gone through.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, like he just strikes the perfect target, and you're exactly right. I think a lot of that has to do with the tone of it's a weirdly light tone considering the subject matter, and you've got like people turning into demons and being tortured and stuff. Um,
Yeah. I mean, even this dig at Islam is so sarcastic. I love the part about the prawns, like this bizarre otherworldly creatures which no member of the faithful had actually seen. So they're being ordered by God not to eat this thing that none of them have actually ever seen in person. It's just so like absurd and ridiculous, and I think that's what makes it work.
yep, yep. I agree.
I also didn't know sodomy was cool. I wonder if that's actually true.
Yeah, there's far too many things in this book made me think like, is that a real thing? Like this
Yeah,
the story of the pilgrimage to the Arabian Sea to go to Mecca. Like, is that based on a historical event at all?
I
I
don't think so.
I don't either, but you have to wonder considering this book.
We didn't talk about that very much, but I think the weirdest part of that is how like how at first it feels anachronistic because like he doesn't reveal what time this takes place in, and like it's this construction of this old what seems like this old village, and then all of a sudden like VCRs are introduced and cars, and you're like, wait, what?
Yeah.
Like the way this village is described at first is this like slice at a time, and I think it's possible, especially in the 80s, that there were these rural villages in India that really were just kind of totally removed from the advancement of technology to where random stuff would be sliced into this ancient way of life. But it just he kind of held that information coyly until it kind of shocks you.
Yeah, I thought that part was fascinating because when it begins, you almost feel like you're in a fantasy world because the most prominent thing that's happening is this guy is in his like what appears to be a magical castle full of magical butterflies.
Yeah,
That
and
that
there's like a world tree in the
yeah,
center.
it's
Yeah.
like a yeah, there's like a world tree and there's like a witch basically. Yeah, there's and then it kind of becomes more and more mundane. Yeah, no, I agree. That was a fascinating part.
But we digress.
Yes, just like Rushdie.
Yeah, we're almost as bad as he is. So this slide is one thing we haven't really been talking about, but I think it's important enough to bring up because over the course of this entire book, there's been a series of murders going on that have kind of been investigated in the background, calling the Granny Ripper murders. And there's a person, uh, Uruhu Simba, who is a black activist that is arrested for the murders, even though it's very clear there's no way he did it. I think he has a pretty solid alibi. He's like a doctor. He's just not the type of person that would ever be responsible for these murders, but he's also an immigrant, and so he's arrested for them. And this slide is his mother reading a statement to the crowd, a crowd that will be later incited, and all the violence that happens around the climax of this book is centered around the riots around this event right here. When Antoinette Roberts spoke, however, her voice was big enough to fill the room on lung power alone. She wanted to talk about her son's day in court, at the committal proceedings, and she was quite a performer. Hers was what Chamcha thought of as an educated voice. She spoke in the BBC accents of one who learns her English diction from World Services, but there was gospel in there too, and hellfire sermonizing. My son filled that dock, she told the silent room. Lord, he filled it up. Sylvester, you will pardon me if I use the name I gave him, not meaning to belittle the warrior's name he took for himself, but only out of ingrained habit. Sylvester, he burst upwards from that dock like Leviathan from the waves. I want you to know how he spoke. He spoke loud, and he spoke clear. He spoke looking at his adversaries in the eyes, and could that prosecutor stare him down? Never in a month of Sundays. And I want you to know what he said. I stand here, my son declared, because I have chosen to occupy the old and honorable role of the uppity, and I'm not going to say that word. Um,
Okay.
I am here because I have not been willing to seem reasonable. I am here for my ingratitude. He was a colossus among the dwarfs. Make no mistake, he said in the court. We are here to change things. I concede at once that we shall ourselves be changed. African, Caribbean, Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi, Cypriot, Chinese. We are other than what we would have been if we had not crossed these oceans, if our mothers and fathers had not crossed the skies in search of work and dignity and a better life for our children. We have been made again. But I say that we shall also be the ones to remake the society, to shape it from the bottom up to the top. We shall be the hewers of the dead wood and the gardeners of the new. It is our turn now. So I think this to me, Matt, gets at the root of all the immigration talk. This is kind of the truth of immigration here is that we are changed by our experiences here, but we also do changing. But I also think this is like representative of the worst nightmare of anti-immigrant
Yeah,
people
right.
because like this idea that it's ours now. Like you've had your turn, we're coming here now, and we're going to change it. That is the exact thing people that are even in our country right now are staunchly terrified of. That people will come to our country and bring their things and change our way of life, and there's nothing we can do to stop it.
Yeah, these parts of the book I found a bit shocking because it's about England in the 80s, but so much of it rings so true to the exact rhetoric and
Yeah,
the exact talking points that you hear in 2018 USA.
I think it just shows how universal and never-ending these kind of arguments have been. That we've always been arguing about immigration. That we've always been arguing about the role of immigrants in society and what immigration does to the country, to the that people are immigrating to, and the country they are leaving from, and most importantly, the migrants themselves.
Yeah, yeah.
But
I
I
don't know.
mean, I don't think there's anything false here at all. I think this is exactly representative of most importantly what Rushdie believes, but also the reality of immigration.
So one of these riots were there actual riots that were similar to these riots? I don't know. I
I
don't
don't know.
I don't know my
Probably.
my late 20th century British history.
So the actual inspiration for the riot in the book is that Simba is killed, right? That he's,
Yeah,
I think he falls off his bed or something. Is the
yeah,
argument? It's something constructed to be so ridiculous that there's no way that's the way it actually
yeah. That
happened.
was another one of those almost like chillingly familiar things where it's like, yeah,
Yes, yes,
he dies randomly in prison, which is like, yeah, I'm pretty sure that like exact thing has happened, and
yeah,
there was probably a riot due to it in
yep,
the USA in the last 5 years or
yeah.
yeah, um,
I think
yeah,
once again, I find it so fascinating, and maybe Dark Glass did this intentionally, but how the books we read end up being so fitting to the times we're reading them in,
hmm
and it's you're right. This is a book from 1988, and not to say I think the United Kingdom was having an immigrant crisis of its own then, but it is so crazy how much this mirrors the fights that we're having right now.
yeah. Maybe everything just always keeps happening over and over.
That's probably true.
All right.
So you got two slides here. I
Okay.
apologize.
That's fine. Um, so as the book reaches its climax, Chamcha starts to evilly sabotage Jabril's relationship by obsessively calling their house and using as many different voices to prick at the man's jealousy. None bothers him as much as the poems coming from a particularly unusual man. These satanic verses eventually drive Jabril crazy enough that he grabs the horn of Ezreal and brings destruction down on the city while looking for his nemesis, who he only learns later is Chamcha. Um, so here we are. So this is basically a scene where Jabril comes across Chamcha, and this is sort of like the final reckoning between the two characters. So Jibril Farishta, put on trial by Chamcha, gets a rougher ride than Mimi and Billy in New York, and is declared guilty, for all perpetuity, of the inexcusable thing, from which what follows. But we may permit ourselves to speculate a while about the true nature of this ultimate, this inexpiable offense. Is it really, can it be simply his silence on Rose's stairs? Or are there deeper resentments here, gripes for what this so-called primary cause is in truth no more than a substitute, a front? For are they not conjoined opposites, these two, each man the other's shadow, one seeking to be transformed into the foreignness he admires, the other preferring contemptuously to transform? One a hapless fellow who seems to be continually punished for uncommitted crimes, the other called angelic by one and all, the type of man who gets away with everything. We may describe Chamcha as being somewhat less than life-size, but loud, vulgar. Jibril is, without question, a good deal larger than life, a disparity which might easily inspire neo-Procrustean lusts in Chamcha to stretch himself by cutting Farishta down to size. What is unforgivable? What, if not the shivering nakedness of being wholly known to a person one does not trust? And has not Jibril seen Saladin Shamsha in circumstances, hijack, fall, arrest, in which the secrets of the self were utterly exposed? Well then, are we coming closer to it? Should we even say that these two are fundamentally different types of self? Might we not agree that Jibril, for all his stage name and performances, and in spite of born-again slogans, new beginnings, metamorphoses, has wished to remain, to a large degree, continuous, that is, joined to and arising from his past, that he chose neither near fatal illness nor transmuting fall, that in point of fact he fears above all things the altered states in which his dreams leak into and overwhelm his waking self, making him that angelic Jibril he has no desire to be, so that his is still a self which, for our present purposes, we may describe as true. Whereas Saladin Chamcha is a creature of selected discontinuities, a willing reinvention. He preferred revolt against history being what makes him, in our chosen idiom, false. And might we not go on to say that it is this falsity of self that makes possible in Chamcha a worse and deeper falsity? Call this evil, and that this is the truth, the door that was opened in him by his fall, while Jibril, to follow the logic of our established terminology, is to be considered good by virtue of wishing to remain, for all his vicissitudes, at bottom an untranslated man. But, and again but, This sounds, does it not, dangerously like an intentionalist fallacy? Such distinctions, resting as they must on the idea of the self as being, ideally, homogeneous, non hybrid, pure, an utterly fantastic notion, cannot, must not suffice. No, let's rather say an even harder thing, that evil may not be as far beneath our surfaces as we like to say it is, that in fact we fall towards it naturally, that is, not against our natures, and that Saladin Chamcha set out to destroy Jibril Farishta because, finally, it proved so easy to do. The true appeal of evil being the seductive ease at which one may embark upon that road, and, let us add in conclusion, the latter impossibility of return.
Whew. So, Matt, what's all that mean?
Um, well, I mean, I think that's yet another fascinating thing about this book is that the author is arguing with himself.
He certainly is.
Like he doesn't know. He's the author via the narrator is discussing his characters. I mean, when does this ever happen in a novel?
It doesn't. It
Where
doesn't.
you're like, so let me just hold on, reader. Let me just talk about my characters for a second. So I've created these two characters, and they're sort of opposites. And and this one is one who prefers to remain as he is, but he just kind of acts. And the other one has like this continuity of self because he can't stand to be who he is. And is that where the evil came in? Is that where the evil came into the situation, or is it just that evil is innate to all of us and it just happens out of convenience for this character and there's no real cosmic meaning to it at all?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah. I think you're right. I mean, I think that's like we tend to want like neat conclusions. We tend to want our authors to, I meant this, but I think this is Rushdie wrestling with the characters that he's created and the rules that he has created, and I love this end conclusion of him seems to be um, perhaps in this quest to find out what is evil and what is good, we're overthinking these things. Perhaps evil is just opportunity and our nature falls towards evil when we are given the opportunity to do so. So Saladin Shamshed set out to destroy Jibril because it proved so easy to do so.
Yeah.
And I think that's fascinating.
I mean, I felt like that feels more true to me because all
Yeah.
of the pontificating about the nature of evil and where evil comes from and is it due to some character flaw that Shamcha has that Jibril doesn't. I mean, for one thing, Jibril does a lot of bad things in this story.
Sure. Yeah.
Not as bad as what Shamcha ultimately does, but um, well, sort of, but it's not really his fault. Anyway, that's a separate thing. But the point is like we talked about this earlier actually before the podcast how like one thing that I'm fascinated with, one theme is this idea of deserving or justice. And like no one Shamsha doesn't deserve to be turned into a devil and to be beaten and to be treated terribly.
Yeah.
And Jibril doesn't really deserve to get away with all the stuff he gets away with, although you could argue that he doesn't actually in the end. Um,
Yeah.
and this book is sort of making you question the idea of deserving things and whether that's a coherent concept. I feel.
Mm-hmm. Sergey asked what we did think about the vase story. That's good because I didn't pull that, and I was thinking about that, and I almost pulled that slide. I probably should have. Do you remember the vase story, Matt? The story of two people. I can't remember if they were in a relationship or friends or not, but one bought a vase for another, and he put it in this treasured position on his mantle. They got in a fight once, and she saw it up there and knocked it down and smashed it, and he refused to forgive her for it forever. And I get the lesson of the story was him saying, "You didn't understand how important it was to me." And the response was, "Well, if they didn't understand how important it was to you, how can you blame them for destroying that thing that was so important to you?" And I think that's a fascinating little lesson in there.
Yeah.
That, like, how can you be mad for someone destroying a thing which mattered most to you if they didn't realize that it mattered that much to you? And I think you can relate Chamcha and Jibril there a lot because Jibril is kind of so aimless and directionless and without purpose that Chamcha has made him the reason why everything is bad. He's made him the guy who broke his vase when he didn't even realize he was doing it.
Yeah, I mean, out of all of the bad things that Jabril does in the story, he isn't really responsible for what happens to Chamcha. Like, because the story basically says when the police came and dragged him away, Jabril was like in some kind of trance or something, or am I wrong? Um,
No,
I
I think you're right.
I seem to remember like he was kind of not quite present in that moment, and so like you can't really blame him for letting it happen. Um, and and yet, yeah, Saladin definitely is projecting all of this stuff onto him. It is all ridiculous. Like,
Yeah.
so the first part of this quote is true, that it's not about the silence on Rose's stairs. It's about this lifelong resentment for basically himself.
Right.
Like he resents who he is, and he projects that onto Jabril.
Yeah, and he projects it onto his father as well. I mean, you could argue that his father is as much of a vase breaker than as Jabril is.
Yeah,
That he refuses to forgive his father for this perceived slight that was not intentional.
yeah. The stuff with him and his father is I don't know, for some reason that all struck me quite hard, that they're both cut from the same cloth,
Yeah,
which means that even though they should love each other more than anyone, they split so viciously because um, there's vulnerability that comes along with that love. And
yeah. Well, and if
yeah,
you're cut from the same cloth and one of you decides they want to so vehemently burn up that cloth, well, you're burning up the other
yeah,
person too. So
right,
it's like
yeah,
when you are so much like me that when you say you are ashamed of who you are saying you are ashamed of me.
yeah, right, exactly.
All right, so that's the end of this part. We're gonna now move on to we're back with Aisha and Mirza Saeed and the pilgrimage to Mecca. We didn't talk about that, but she basically said the only way that we're gonna cure this cancer is if everyone in this town picks up and we're all gonna walk to Mecca, even though it's across the sea. Don't worry about that. It's fine. They've gone through the pilgrimage and people have died and they've started to lose faith. And in this moment, Aisha um, goes to Jabril once again and asks what to do. Aisha in the night, stalking the shadows, lying down, rising to go on the prowl again. There was an uncertainty about her. Then the slowness came, and she seemed to dissolve into the shadows of the mosque. She returned at dawn. After the morning prayer, she asked the pilgrims if she might address them, and they, doubtfully, agreed. Last night, the angel did not sing, she said. He told me instead about doubt, about how the devil makes use of it. I said, but they doubt me. What can I do? He answered, only proof can silence doubt. She had their full attention. Next, she told them what Mizri Said had suggested in the night. He told me to go and ask my angel, but I know better, she cried. How could I choose between you? It is all of us, or none. Why should we follow you? The Sarpanch asked. After all the dying, the baby and all. Because, when the waters part, you will be saved. You will enter in the glory of the Most High. What waters? Mizra Said yelled. How will they be divided? Follow me, Aisha concluded, and judge me by their parting. His offer had contained an old question. What kind of idea are you? And she, in turn, had offered him an old answer. I was tempted, but I am renewed. Am uncompromising, absolute, pure. And so she leads them all to their deaths.
Yeah, or maybe they all go to heaven.
No, they're dead.
Yeah, that's one of the more I have no idea what to make of this magical realism parts of the story, because
Yeah,
she leads them all into the water, and those of them that are sort of on the fence are sort of like ejected from the water, but they see all of the pilgrims walking along the bottom of the ocean, like in um, you know, the Moses story.
yeah, yeah,
Um, and they all see the same thing, and so it's like a magical realism thing where you're like, well, did that happen, or did they all just walk into the ocean and drown out of fanaticism? And story kind of gets to have it both ways because of how the magical realism works, but they definitely never come out of the ocean, so
yeah.
definitely
I
dead.
mean, it says their corpses float to the
Right, yeah,
surface.
yeah, yeah,
Um, yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to read it either way, but I also think that if you follow what I think Salman Rushdie is saying throughout the story, that this idea that, like we said, this idea of uncompromising, absolute, pure is the most dangerous kind of idea. Um, the idea that will not bend, will not break. This is the only way, and it has to be this way. And again, we have to say, just like we did with Mahound, that this idea is coming from herself, and I think you can kind of poke holes in it too. Like I he told me about doubt, how the devil makes use of it. I said, but they doubt me. What can I do? He answered, only proof can silence doubt. Now, when in any dealings with spirituality and religion have anyone ever told you that doubt is conquered by proof, not by faith?
Right.
Like this is almost antithetical to like everything I've ever learned about religion. That the only way to silence doubt is through absolute, unquestioning proof. And it's like no, like there's spirituality demands faith. It demands accepting things that we can't prove. This seems not right, um, and
Yeah.
yet it's followed.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's how rigid she is about it. Is she's like, look, there's not going to be any compromise, and basically, we're all going to walk into the ocean, and we're either all going to drown or we're going to go to Mecca, and either way, I'm happy. Like uh,
Right.
that's how it's like the thing with Muhammad where he just wanted he just wanted to regain the integrity of the idea. That was the most important thing.
Right, right. Judge me by their parting. I, I, I know like we're not supposed to be rooting for this person, but this line to me like just lands so wonderfully. Follow me, and judge me by their
Yeah,
parting.
yeah. I mean, it was what was interesting, like from the reading experience, was that we're conditioned to view this as okay. We're setting up this story. Either she's going to be right, and the character that we're following around, the skeptical village leader, is going to be wrong,
Yeah.
and he's going to fall to his knees and repent and whatever. Maybe he'll be left behind, maybe not. Or she's going to be wrong, flatly wrong, embarrassed. This is going to be a blow against religion and faith and magic, and maybe his wife's probably going to die of cancer. That's going to be sad, but there was nothing you could have done anyway, and it's going to be a big tragedy, and they're all going to go home. Neither of those things is what happens.
Yeah.
Both things sort of happen,
Right.
but in a way where it's just like maximally terrible. So I thought it was a very interesting way of doing that, and
Yeah.
I'm still not
Because
sure entirely what to do with it.
an uncompromising, absolute, pure idea, pure ideology destroys everything, believer and non-believer. It doesn't matter. It doesn't care. It destroys it all. And I
Yeah,
think
I love
that's what
that.
it's saying.
Yeah, I love that. That's great. That's exactly what happens. Destroys their whole village, and then even though he survives, it destroys him too.
Yep. Exactly.
Wow.
Yep.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. All right, let's wrap this up with the last slide. So here, Chamcha makes peace with his father, and he gets the lamp that he had thought was his birthright. And I'll mention that Saladin is not actually his name. Saladin is
Oh
like
yeah,
his
he's
anglicized version of
yeah,
Salahuddin.
he's reverted to his name.
Yeah,
He's removed that old identity.
yeah. That afternoon, Salahuddin found himself alone with his father while the two women napped. He discovered that he, who had been so determined to have everything out in the open, to say the word, was now awkward and inarticulate, not knowing how to speak. But Changes had something to say. I want you to know, he said to his son, that I have no problem about this thing at all. A man must die of something, and it is not as though I were dying young. I have no illusions. I know I am not going anywhere after this. It's the end. That's okay. The only thing I'm afraid of is pain, because when there is pain, a man loses his dignity. I don't want that to happen. Salahuddin was awestruck. First, one falls in love with one's father all over again, and then one learns to look up to him. The doctors say you're a case in a million, he replied truthfully. It looks like you've been spared the pain. Something in Changes relaxed at that, and Salahuddin realized how afraid the old man had been, how much he needed to be told. Bas Changes Chamchawala said gruffly, "Then I'm ready. And by the way, you get the lamp after all."
So it was really hard for me to pull a slide that encapsulates the repairing of their relationship. I think this is as close as I could get to something that fit in one slide. But basically, the end of this book has his father dying and him returning home to make peace and to repair the relationship with his father, which he successfully does. He has kind of found himself and the himself that he uh, always was from the beginning. And then the part that I really want to talk about. So he gets the lamp after all, the lamp being kind of a symbol of the thing he always wanted from the thing his father was going to pass down, basically his identity. And he rubs it, and Zini shows up like right away. I think
Yeah.
like obviously timed, but we don't just put down the lamp imagery. We pick it up again because the very end of this book has Jabril showing up at his house, basically having killed he killed Ali, right? And
Yeah.
and the
Well,
producer because he assumed they were
well,
together.
yeah, I mean, I think at that, so we've never said this explicitly, but he's he has devolved into pretty strong paranoid schizophrenic delusions.
Yeah,
And he's been having these episodes where he'll just like wander the streets and he'll think that he's the archangel and he's on some holy mission, but he's actually just roving randomly and like
yeah,
shouting incoherent things at people, and it's really obvious that that's what's actually happening because people will later relate to him that that's what he was doing. And so in his mind, he like took holy revenge on the guy, which was actually him shooting the guy, and then like one of his figments, who represents some kind of like female goddess, pushed Ali off the roof, but of course it was actually him that did it.
yeah.
Um,
It was the Rika, the person you had an affair with, that jumped off the roof after he disappeared and took her kids with us. We didn't talk
yeah,
about that, but Jesus.
yeah,
Um, yeah, yeah. So at the end, he shows up at Chamcha's house, and he puts the gun in the lamp, and then rubs the lamp, and the gun pops out, and he shoots himself.
yeah, which is pretty tragic.
Yeah. So that's, I mean, that's the this is the part I had the hardest idea kind of getting my head around, right? So we have this idea, we have these two characters, and they're very similar and very different in very different ways, and um our, our one guy who like saw evil and did evil things but was able to come back from it and realize his mistake, and we have our other guy who's just kind of doomed into this role of playing roles of being that actor. One of them escapes from acting as another person, the other can't, and ends up dead for it. Why is the book punishing um, Jabril and vindicating and redeeming Chamcha?
Yeah, I don't have an answer. Like the closest I could get to an answer that satisfied me was that the book is rejecting the idea that there's anything like justice in the world. Like Jabril never
Yeah,
did anything to deserve. He was, I mean, basically he was born dirt poor. His mom died, his dad died, and then he was given a series of legs up out of that existence, that he didn't earn. You know, they were given to him, and then he had a life of a beloved movie star, and then he goes very tragically insane and kills his loved ones and then kills himself. It's like, yeah, there's nothing. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm like really completely missing the point, but I just feel like the lesson is that no, there's no justice to that. That's just the way it is. I don't
yeah.
know.
I mean, I I think that's I think that's fitting because I think it loops back into this idea that we try to we use religion and we use stories and we use these things, these absolute ideas, in order to like wrangle the mysteries of life and understand why these terrible things happen and understand why what would lead a person to becoming good and what would lead a person to becoming evil, and we use religion as kind of a way to explain that and understand that and make ourselves feel safe with it, when in actuality some people are just kind of messed up, and then some people just get dealt bad hands, and there's so much of it just outside any semblance of control, and that's terrifying. So I could see it getting to that. I don't know if that's us putting too much into the story or not, though.
Yeah, I mean, I have this suspicion that like someone else could just say like, "No, Matt, like this is what that means," and then like explain it, and then be like,
Right.
"Oh, yeah, you're right. That is what that means." But that's one that's like I think I walked into this conversation like intimidated at this book because out of all of the years worth of books that we've done, this is the one where I was just like, I got maybe 10% of this book,
Yeah.
and so that's what I'm going to talk about. But a lot of it, I'm going to try to find my way to something that makes sense, but and which is always rewarding. Like it's always rewarding to
Sure.
try to figure it out, even if you don't like quote unquote solve the puzzle. But yeah, I don't feel like I have fully understood this, and I planned actually to like read more about it and read what others have said about it to maybe get a better handle on it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I'm done with this book at all.
Hmm.
I think this is something I'm going to be revisiting a lot. I think this says so many different things, and like I understand why it pissed off so many people, but I think it's a real shame that it was banned in so many places because I think this has so many things to say about humanity and being alive and identity and finding yourself. Like our world is an ever changing place. Like immigration used to be a very specific thing, but the world as a culture is changing all aspects of life for everyone. We're being introduced to all these new ideas and these new peoples that do things differently than us and thinks things differently than us, and it is. I think this is a great book to explore what that can do to you, good and bad.
Yeah, and it's almost like a parable. The fact that almost certainly the people who were most pissed off by it didn't read it. They just heard about it. They probably just
Sure,
just heard the
sure,
parts about it that were most offensive, which
yeah,
is sort of a thing that happens all the time, right? Like people are always
sure,
like super outraged about something that they
yeah,
third hand heard about through a headline and didn't
yeah.
actually bother to know anything about the context of the situation or what the thing actually was.
Yeah, instead of focusing on why we're exploring Muhammad in that way, we
Hmm.
just lash out at the fact that we're doing it at all.
Yeah.
And I think like to not just rail on Islam, like the same thing happens whenever you do any kind of exploration of Jesus. I don't think there's fatwas done for that, but I remember when the Last Temptation of Christ film came out, and there were bomb threats on theaters that would show it, and I think a guy drove a truck into a theater just because this was a movie that just said, wouldn't it be interesting to just look into what it would have been like to make the decision Jesus had to make the night before his crucifixion? Like, wouldn't that be a cool thing to look into? No, we can't do that. Like, what? Like, it's ridiculous, and
Yeah.
this is not something uh, solely. This is not a problem solely with the religion of Islam at all.
Oh yeah, definitely. It's
Yeah.
yeah.
Sergey says the book has so many good characters. I love how you managed to get through most of it without mentioning Rekha Merchant or Pamela. That's very true. We didn't mention Pamela at all, who is Chamcha's wife, who is actually a pretty important character in the book.
Yeah.
And
Oh yeah,
um,
no, there's so many characters though.
yeah,
Like I mean, we have to pare down the slides and basically basically we're either going to just talk about each of the characters for one slide and not at all talk about like the plot, or do what we did, I think, and maybe try to like pick out some through lines.
yeah, yeah. I would have loved to talk about those characters more. I completely agree that looking down, like if you pull up a character list and you look down this, and each one of these is a fleshed out, interesting person who has something to say, and who I think that relates to what the book is trying to
I
say.
mean, I even
And
liked his roommate Jumpy.
yeah, Jumpy, yeah. Jumpy was Indian, right? I think
Yeah,
he was.
yeah,
Yeah, and Jumpy's like a fascinating character as well because he is like existing in this world, in this London world, in a way completely different from how Chamcha is. He's seemingly like accepted. He's an artist as well, right? He's a poet, I think, but he's also like teaching martial arts at the place.
yeah.
But he has transitioned to his life here in a way so different than Saladin has, and I think that juxtaposition is pretty fascinating.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of different characters serve that role of being like, well, this is how this person does the immigrant thing, and
Right.
there's no one way to do it.
No, but I think that the main idea is that there will be change and destruction on some level. You will not be the same person you were from your home country, and I don't think Rushdie's saying that that's inherently bad, but if you try to resist that or you try to force it, that's when bad things happen.
Yeah.
All right, so let's wrap this whole thing up and let's talk about next month's book, which we don't really know for sure what it is yet because I started the poll so late, Matt. I'm leaving the poll open for 2 extra days, but as of this moment, the book that is winning the poll is our long suffering runner up, John Dies at the End by David Wong. I think it's 9 votes ahead of the competition right now, so if you really, really don't want to read this book, there's still time for you to go vote if you haven't already and change it. But the poll is closing this Sunday, the 29th at 9:30 Central Time. So you have until then, and we will announce the winner officially, formally in our post on Monday. But the next book club will be on Friday, August 31st at 9:30 p.m. Central Time, unless Matt tells me that time doesn't work for him, and then we'll change it. But that's when the book club should be. We'll probably 99% be talking about John Dies at the End. So go get the book for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this one. Every time a book gets runner-up status multiple times, I basically decide that I'm going to read it eventually, no matter what.
Yeah,
So,
I think we had basically decided that if this lost again, we were just gonna use it as our like pick 'em
yeah.
for the biannually. But hey,
Yeah.
we don't have to anymore.
Yay.
Oh, cool. Sergey says one more thing before we go.
Okay.
How Alleluia Cohen, who had the most ridiculous name ever, is revealed to be Cohen before her father rejected their heritage. That's very true. I had
Yeah.
forgotten about that. But yeah, even the Lily White person she's an immigrant as well, and
Yeah.
she changed to adopt to the civilization that they were moved to. So yeah, that's great. That's
Cool.
great. Everyone's an immigrant.
Yeah.
Everyone.
Yeah, I forgot that detail.
All right, guys, thank you so much for everyone that tuned in live. And for those listening at home on the podcast, come hang out live. I like when people come hang out live.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
If you guys like what we do here at the Daily Planet and want to see more of it, head over to our Patreon, patreon.com/dailyplanetfilms, and consider donating $1 a month or whatever else you can afford. You can access our private Discord server as well as the ability to vote for which books we cover on this show and tons of other cool benefits. Check it out.
That's right. If you have any questions or comments or just want to reach out to us with your opinion on this novel, you can find us on Twitter at Daily Planet Films or email us at dailyplanetfilms@gmail.com. Thanks, you guys, and we will see you all next month. I was nervous about that. I thought that went okay.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I don't feel like sometimes I feel like I discover something amazing and new that I had never seen before. That happened less this time. Just
yeah.
because I was like, man, this is hard.
Yeah. I think we did the book justice. I hope you feel that way, Sergey. I really thank you for making me read this book because I don't think I would have done it otherwise, and I think I probably would have abandoned it if I was just reading it for fun when I got to parts that I got stuck at. But having to read this and having to read it thoroughly was probably the best thing for me.
Yeah, I
because
agree.
I really love the hell out of it.
Yeah, thanks. Because this is exactly what I want out of the book club. Like
Yeah.
being forced to read stuff that I just would not make time for otherwise, and then it like enriches me, and I feel like I
Yeah.
am a better person basically.
I really adore this book, and I didn't think it was gonna be that way. Not because I was prejudging, but just like I remember reading that first chapter, and then even reading the second chapter, and I was really having a hard time breaking into it, and then it just kind of opened itself up for me, and I loved it. Like I was constantly behind on this book because I got sick, and I was like I have a reading schedule. Believe it or not, I have a reading schedule that to try to fit it on my books in between the book club books, and I had certain days that I knew I was gonna start it and had to get to a certain point, and my sickness just knocked me behind, so I ended up having to like do some marathon reading sessions, and I loved them.
Yeah.
It was great, so much fun, and this conversation was great. I knew even as I was struggling with the book, I knew it was going to be a difficult conversation, but a fulfilling one, and it was.
Yeah.
It was for me.
Yeah, me too.
Cool. My voice is very tired.
Yes, I'm also quite tired, so let us say goodnight.
Yeah. Thanks for hanging out, Sergey, and thanks again for making us read that. I'm going to probably swoop back to the other 5 books you recommended, and even if we don't cover them on a book club, I want to read that stuff too, because if they're as fulfilling as this, then I want to experience all that stuff. So thank you again, really appreciate it.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks. And good night.
Good night, everybody. Oh shit, where's the button?